Now, I would like to take you back to the garden thing when you're having this experience with these plants. I had a experience once on a very high dose of marijuana edibles. I went into a grow room that this local dispensary had set up. It's this big room filled with plants, and it was the first time when I walked in, it's the first time I've ever been around pot plants where I felt like they were aware that I was there. Yeah. It was very strange. You had this weird feeling of them having much more sensitivity than you imagined. That they're aware of you, but as you said, they're benign, and they're just sort of sitting there. But it was almost like they were saying hello to me. Like they recognized that I could tune into them because I was so barbecued that I was on their wavelength. When you're out there with those plants and you said that you felt consciousness from them, now, as an intelligent, rational person, did you start pondering whether or not you were just perceiving this because it was convenient and you were hallucinating and adding all this contextual weirdness to this situation?
I'm sure I was projecting things onto them, but I've looked at this question and the science of it pretty closely. Right. And how you define consciousness matters here, but plants are conscious in the sense of they're aware of their environment. They have senses. They're not like our senses, but they're picking up on chemicals in the air and in the soil and light in very specific ways, and they're reacting, not just instinctually, but appropriately. There are experiments that show that plants can learn in some primitive way. So we have to understand that we have one kind of consciousness, and other animals and even plants have another kind of consciousness. So it's real. It's a real thing. The idea that they're looking back at me, I'm being metaphorical, but that they're aware of me in the way that the plant is aware that the bee is nearby and does certain things, sometimes to trap the bee and hold it there for a longer amount of time to load it up with pollen. The world as we perceive it is dependent on the particular senses we have. We've got the big five senses that you always hear about, and there's some other littler ones. How we locate ourselves in space. We're pretty good at that too. But other creatures have a different set of senses, and therefore they live in a different world. So the bee, for example, can see ultraviolet light we can't see. So if you could get inside a bee's head, the world would look very different. And you'd see patterns like landing markings on flowers in ultraviolet colors that they can see that you've never seen before. Ditto, they also can experience electromagnetic radiation. We can't. It's all around us. But we don't feel it. They feel it. And the reason they do is a plant that has a strong electromagnetic field hasn't been visited recently by another bee. So they know this is you're going to get a lot of nectar here. Oh. And whereas if you're going by you're flying by a flower and it's got a soft field, doesn't have a big field, it's probably just been visited by someone else, so skip it. So they're living in a world where they're perceiving cell phone radiation and all the kinds of crap we're putting into the electromagnetic spectrum. So we have to realize that this is a very specific world that we're perceiving in our normal consciousness that is the one that we need to perceive, that's good for us, we're designed for it, reflecting our bodies and our upright stance, everything about us. But other creatures are seeing a different world. And one of the interesting things about psychedelics is you get some insight into that. You